Talk about two other major figures in the 60s coming out of the 50s, true real transformative figures in this era of two presidents, John F. Kennedy and his vice president who became president when he was assassinated, Lyndon Johnson. John F. Kennedy was a northerner who in 1961 is the first and only Catholic ever elected president. At the time, he was the second youngest president ever to be elected at 43 years old. And here they are. Here he is debating Richard Nixon during the 1960 election. The popular vote was real close. He won 49.6% to Nixon's 49 points, or he won 49.7 to Nixon's 49.6. And where it really counts in the Electoral College, it was also pretty close. Not as close, but pretty close. He won with 303 electoral votes to 219 for Nixon, and there he is getting inaugurated. He was a family man. He was the first president in the modern era to have little kids. And here you can see his wife posing with the kids and the kids playing in the Oval Office. And he was from Massachusetts, and he sailed and was pretty active. He was a World War II veteran, had written a book called Profiles in Courage, and was pretty popular and charismatic. He had some ideas, and this is a pretty interesting picture of him meeting Bill Clinton when Bill Clinton was a teenager. But here's some of the ideas he had. His policies he called the New Frontier, entering the New Frontier. He wanted to fight poverty and inequality. He wanted to increase the minimum wage for poor people and also young people. He wanted to create 4.9. He wanted to put 4.9 million dollars in for housing in the cities. He wanted equal pay for equal work, that is, both for minorities and women. And he wanted to outlaw the poll tax. This was before he became a fan of civil rights. He was wavering on civil rights because he got elected with this sort of deal made with Southern Democrats. Of course, once he did embrace civil rights, the Democrats in the South abandoned him. Some of the other programs that Kennedy was big on was food programs, food for the poor, food for children. He built up the military because he felt as a World War II veteran that he was going to eventually have to confront the communists all over the world, and he did, in fact, in Vietnam and in Cuba. He extended Social Security benefits to lots more people. He was worried about pollution, and he led a fight against polluting the rivers and lakes of this country. He expanded the National Parks Program, and he did sign nuclear weapons agreements with Russia. He also expanded welfare to the unemployed. Hey, look, there's little John who just died. I think he died about 10 years ago. He was a pilot, and he died in a plane accident, and there he is playing in the desk. It's probably one of the most famous pictures of Kennedy. He also was responsible for ramping up the space program, which really started under Eisenhower. And here you can see a picture of Yuri Gagarin. He was the first man to go into outer space. Below that is a picture of our first human to go into space, and that was Alan Shepard. And there's Alan Shepard coming in after the launch. There's Alan Shepard getting his medal from the president afterwards. And Kennedy, it was Kennedy's vision, which he would die before it was realized. It was Kennedy's vision to put a man on the moon. And, of course, we did that, and we did it several times, and we were the only country to ever have a man on the moon. So I guess the moon belongs to the United States. Next slide. Unfortunately, Kennedy was assassinated after he had, before he realized his civil rights legislation. He was assassinated running for re-election. Kennedy was getting ready to run and was visiting all over. He was trying to shore up support in the South. He was afraid he was going to lose the South because of civil rights, so he went to Dallas, Texas on November 22nd, 1963. There they are, literally seconds before he was assassinated. Hey, where's the Secret Service? I don't know. We'll talk. If you want to see films, you know what? We will. In class, we'll look at films of his assassination. Thousands came out to see the president in an open limousine, and he and the Texas governor, who you can see if you look at the pointer right here, he's sitting in front of the president. He and the governor of Texas were both shot. And here you can see the Vice President of the United States aboard Air Force One taking the oath of office just hours after the president was shot. And there's the president's wife, and there's the vice president's wife. The assassin was Lee Harvey Oswald, who you see here. He was arrested, did not give any information to the authorities about the crime, and while he was being transferred from one facility to another, he was assassinated by Jack Ruby, who you see on the right with the gun, and there's Lee Harvey at the moment he was being shot in the stomach, and he died of those wounds. Um, that's also suspicious, and we'll talk about it in class. So that's JFK. To talk about Lyndon Johnson, his policies he called the Great Society. Lyndon Johnson had lots of major initiatives. This is a guy who had worked his whole life to be president. He included the two programs that Kennedy loved, which was civil rights and tax cuts. But he also was interested in poverty relief. This because he was born dirt poor, Lyndon Johnson. He also believed in aid to education for higher education and aid to public schools. He wanted national health care. He wanted to extend voting rights and secure voting rights. And he was also in conservation and beautification, beautification of the highways. He wanted to pump money into high poverty areas to help the poor, and for him that was a lot of times minorities. He had a huge tax cut, and he downsized, decreased the size of government, and what that did was unemployment shrank, which is good, less people unemployed. The economy improved, and the deficit, if you remember what the deficit is when you owe more money than you're taking in. And the deficit shrank. So the economy was doing great until we got into Vietnam, which we'll talk about at another date here. We'll talk a little bit about it here. His big initiative, he inherited civil rights, which was one of his big initiatives. His other big initiative was called the War on Poverty. Because Lyndon Johnson grew up poor, and that's the house he grew up in, which was a 2-bedroom, 1-bathroom house in West Texas. His programs aimed at adult and primary literacy, unemployment, and improving public services to poor areas of cities. He started the Head Start program, which is a preschool program for low-income families, which is still around. But he extended that help to other people in other ways, and some of the ways were in education. $1.3 billion went to states during his administration for education programs, and he started Medicare, which provides low-cost medical insurance to most people 65 and over. He strengthened Medicare, and he also strengthened Medicaid, which provides medical care to those who are unable to afford health insurance. Two huge programs that still work today. Here are the effects of the Great Society. There was money because the economy was so strong for a lot of the programs that Lyndon Johnson wanted to have worked. But because during his administration we got involved in Vietnam, most of the money that he had went towards Vietnam. He was not able to realize the promise of a lot of those programs that he had. Those, a lot of times, were promises in those programs that he made to public but could not keep. The power of the federal government, particularly through Vietnam, grew, and that became unpopular. And some thought that there was too much money being given to the poor. The rich people and middle class became resentful. We'll talk a little. In class, we'll talk about the assassination, and the next class we'll talk about Vietnam.